Like, I think the idea of giving up cultural power and significance for the sake of transformation and love is going to be a huge issue for almost everybody.
I agree.
Coming out of COVID, one of the biggest parts I had to get most of my clients to deal with was you are being haunted by numbers that are irrelevant today. Irrelevant numbers. I don't care what your membership was or your church attendance was pre-COVID. It's like telling me, it's like the television industry trying to hit the same numbers that I Love Lucy hit, when there were 3 stations and literally there was something like 1/3 of all Americans all watched television at the same time.
There's probably 2 stations or even 1 at that time, right?
No hit television show will ever do what I Love Lucy did.
No.
And yet we are being haunted by those numbers in the past. So one of the things we got to get rid of is our past understandings of what success is. And we need new understandings of what fruitfulness is and what success is.
Yeah. And one sign I would tell people that I notice all the time is when's the last time you heard a sermon about Jesus? Now, it probably depends on where you go, but I hear sermons from the Old Testament and from Paul and hardly ever from the Gospels. And it's because Jesus is saying things that people don't want to hear in the church right now. He's saying it in a way just like, I don't know. I just don't want to hear that at the moment. That's what I find anyway.
That's interesting. I'll pay attention to that. Yeah.
And I just spent a year doing an interim for a church between their founding 25-year pastor and their next one. And I only preached out of Matthew. I just said, I'm just going to preach out of Matthew. I want to preach Jesus. And by the end, there were some people saying, Brian doesn't preach the whole Bible. It wasn't that they preached Jesus too much. But that's what that's what they were thinking of, like, can we hear from Paul for a minute? Instead of Jesus, he's just, I'm like, Jesus is irritating you. That's what I got from it.
That's very fascinating. I hadn't thought about it that way. What's interesting is there's no way you can actually preach Paul without paying attention to Jesus. Jesus was the giant disruptor to Paul's life. And so everything that Paul does is ultimately about trying to help his peers understand Jesus. So it tells you how far away we've come from
the way people preach Paul around me is that Paul gets a hold of the church. It's not going to be out of control. He's going to get things back in. He's going to tell who can be in leadership. He's going to tell who's got to be out of the church. He's going to tell what sins we're not going to put up with. And Jesus was just like so disruptive, all the time about who's an authority. He's like, I can tell you this, it ain't you. You are not in charge. And they're like, do you know my title? Of course I'm in charge. Anyway, that's another side. But let's go back. So we talk about core values, and then we talk about leading through those core values. Go on with adaptive capacity if I can get you to.
So if you then ask the question, we ask the question, who am I? That's our core values. Then you ask the question, where am I? Where are we? What's the pain of the world around us? What's the problem that we're facing? What's the mission that we exist in this local context? Like as locally as possible. That's the love of God and neighbor.
And that's not only church, that's business as well, really, is to find out what the problem is, where the pain is, and how to solve it.
Yeah. And what's interesting is most businesses really get that that's what makes them a business. There's a product, there's a service. If you're in the town and you say, my gosh, you cannot get good Thai food in this town, and you happen to have someone who can cook really good Thai food, you think there's a business opportunity. But the opportunity is a lack, right? It's a pain. Jim Collins said this. He said, the greatest leaders were not leaders who cast a big vision. They were people who heard the pain of the world and said, let's go fix that. Let's go work on that. Right. And so that's, to me, if you start with who am I? Here's our values. Here's who we really are. Where am I? Where are the pain points and the problems that are calling our name, that are calling for our charism, that are calling for our gift? Then you can say, okay, now how do we now have to be transformed to live out the who am I and the where am I?